You can start the recording. I started. Yeah. So the last class we saw the convergence acceleration. So we derived that FDE for Laplace equation in the form shown in the first equation. But then then we told that the I comma j at n plus 1 is on the left hand side. Okay. Then on the right hand side, you see you have phi n at I plus 1 comma j, then I minus 1 comma j at n plus 1, which means that we are actually replacing the I minus 1 with the latest value, phi n plus 1. Last time I thought you need to have two different, arrays. But now if you look at this, I comma j minus 1 and I minus 1 comma j would have been done already by the time you reach this I comma j. So you may have the fresh new values which you can use for convergence at I minus 1 comma j and I comma j minus 1. So that is why it's put the phi at n plus 1. The right hand side is known already if you loop normally from 0 to I and 0 to n and 0 to n. Okay. So that is why on the right hand side you have this n plus 1 superscript. Now this will have the old value, so you can actually do with one single array. So this will actually accelerate your convergence because as far as possible you are using the values which are updated. Whereas I plus 1 comma j you don't know yet when you are doing I comma j, so you have to use the old time step value. Similarly, I comma j plus 1 also you don't know before doing the calculation. You are only at I comma j when you are doing it. So that also you may have to take the old values. Well, now instead of taking this as the final file, take it as an intermediate value. That's why you put a bar there. So this intermediate value minus the earlier value of phi n. So you have to store that earlier value of phi I comma j for this step. So you do need a storage for that. What was the earlier value of phi n, so that you can actually measure the difference. Okay. So in your program, you make sure you don't make mistakes, which will give you a wrong value for this error or change, you can see. The change in phi in a time step. Now, if you multiply this change by a factor omega and add it to the earlier value, you will get the new value. Now, that factor omega, if it is equal to 1, then it goes back to our earlier, earlier methodology. But if you want to increase convergence, you increase omega greater than 1. You may ask, should I become 1.1, 1.2, or 2, or 3, or 5, or 10, or 100? What value of omega? That you can say only by experimenting for a given problem. It depends on many factors. Okay, so you can't right away say. So you choose a value in your assignment. You choose multiple values of omega. Omega is equal to 1 and omega which is less than 1 and more than 1 also you can test. So if you choose omega more than 1, convergence acceleration will happen. You'll get the answer quickly with less number of iteration. If you decrease it, then you will take more number of iteration. But why do you want to decrease when you can, when it can converge faster? Answer is there may be sometimes oscillations in the solution, which means that the solution may not converge at all if omega is too large. So for that purpose, you reduce omega, so the solution at least converges to a stable value, but it may take more number of iterations to do that. So if omega is greater than 1, it's called successive over relaxation, or just omega is greater than 1, you can just call it over relaxation or successive over relaxation. Similarly, 1 omega is less than 1 also you can call it under relaxation or successive under relaxation. It's not there, just under relaxation. Okay, it's used when convergence oscillating between some values. Fine, we saw this last class. Then we looked at Poisson's equation, where the two Laplace equations are converted to Poisson by the right hand side has being non-zero, P and Q, where P and Q are functions of x and y, or maybe constants. So by varying this P and Q, you can get a variety of clustering, grid, and a lot of options can be done. How to do that, people have done already. You can go to this reference, which is Sorensen's reference, and study if you are interested. So in the computational plane, Poisson's equations look like this. So the challenge is to choose P and Q properly so that you get a desirable grid with reasonable amount of effort, both computational and human. So an example of cascade clustering points near an airfoil in a cascade problem is shown here, grid generation. Some close-up views are shown here. We stopped here last class, right? So we'll go to the next step, which is example grids. You can also use this for 3D, psi xx plus psi yy plus psi zz is equal to 0, 3D Laplace equation, and you can generate such grids. Now these people have used Poisson equations. You can see some numbers 4, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, etc. So if you use these grids for the whole aeroplane, somewhere it may give some unreasonable results. So one trick people use is to divide your grid into several blocks. So inside a block, you can easily generate. But at the boundary points of the block, you should be careful. Okay, so that they match nicely, like shown here, shown in this figure. See, between 10 and 11, if you see, if I remove that dark line, you wouldn't even realize that there was a block. Okay, they appear to be of the same block. Similarly, between all block boundaries, you should have very smooth transition between groups. You can use something for 7, something for 6, something for 8, but in the boundary they should look smooth, and it should look as if they are a very smooth grid. Okay, this is the challenge in grid generation. While solving also you can use blocks. Even while generating grids also you can use blocks. For ease of generating grids, if you have a long surface of very complicated curvature, in regions of high curvature you divide it into smaller segments. Generate separate grids there and then join with the neighboring grids. Then check whether the whole thing looks smooth. Otherwise, tweak some parameters here and there. Now, what you see here is just the surface of the aircraft. When you solve, you need to solve in 3D the outer space also. So they have taken some, cuts, some planes to show how the 3D grid looks like. So you can see some two surfaces here. There will be a surface at every plane. So you can imagine the volume being tessellated, small volumes. Then earlier, without this blocking, you can see that even this will have some curvature effect without blocking, without multi-blocking. near these sharp corners, okay, you see there seems to be grid is like this, and suddenly it is moving in the other direction. There seems to be some skewness also here in this area. Grid is a bit skewed, and here also is a sharp discontinuity propagating. So this was overcome by such kind of Poisson equation. Okay. So with Poisson equation, you can actually smoothen and reduce the skewness actually. Okay. Now I just want to give you a introduction to adaptive grids. Although we won't go deeper into adaptive grids, at least you know the philosophy behind adaptive grids, how they're used. Any doubts here so far? Any doubts, Shashank? Samivasan, any doubts? Surya Prasad, any doubt? Sanjay, any doubt?
No, sir.
Okay, thanks for answering. So now we'll go to this adaptive grids. Well, now we saw what we are seeing here is a uniform grid without clustering near the wall. So you can see the bound layer velocity profile which you obtain using this uniformly spaced grid. Flow is there, delta F, delta Y is shown. This bound layer delta, okay, this figure delta denotes the bound layer thickness. Okay. Yeah, we should have, by this time probably you should know all this bound layer thickness, momentum thickness, everything. So I won't dwell deep into it. Probably in fluid mechanics you would have learnt about it. Have you? Shashank? Sanjay?
Yes, sir, we have learned.
Okay. So the velocity profile when you compute it looks like this.
But sir, outside the boundary layer, it's almost equal to free stream velocity rate. Why is it parabolic here?
See, it reaches free stream in the, the fourth arrow. There
Yes.
it reaches. Yeah. Now, what they are doing is, they know the problem, and probably it's exaggerated. It's not up to scale. Okay. You're right. 95% of free stream velocity is reached, at least. But this shows only 50% of the free stream velocity is reached, as shown. But don't worry about it. It is just representative, schematic diagram. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Now, if you cluster more grids near the wall, you see how much the bound layer profile changes. Now this looks more realistic, correct? Velocity profile here, yes, looks like the turbulent bound layer. Here looks like laminar bound layer. So you get this difference if you cluster points near the wall, you can capture this gradient. Whereas this uniform grid is incapable of capturing. Otherwise, you may have to put extremely high number of points. You'll be putting useless points in the free stream also. So you'll be adding the load to the computational time, and RAM also. So now the motivation is to cluster more points at places where there are high gradients of flow properties. So this flow properties may be pressure, temperature, density, or speed, depending on the problem you have. Okay. So more often than not, the complexities of resulting flow field are not known a priori. Before you solve, you don't know how complex it will be in general. especially when you are studying unsteady flows. Only when the flow is evolving, you know what are the problems that will come. So how do you generate a grid expecting that some gradient will be there here when you don't know where the gradients will be? This is a problem. So an imaginary first cut approach for you to understand. So solve using a known grid with a guessed clustering. Now look at the solution. Go back and correct the grid clustering, looking at the solution. Get the new solution and correct the grid again, and so on and so forth. Keep on doing this. Okay. A better approach will be, instead of completing the solution and looking at it, as and when you solve, look at every time step, which is extremely expensive, or every 10 time steps, every 50 time steps. You look at the solution, how the solution has changed. Now this intermediate solution will have some gradients. Okay. So it can be during iteration if you are aiming for a steady state flow, or this elliptic kind of flow. It can be time stepping if you are looking at either unsteady flows or hyperbolic or what is the other one, parabolic equations. Then something called pseudo time stepping. What is the pseudo time stepping? Actually, you want only steady state flows like your Laplace equation or other things, but you solve the unsteady flow. You solve dou u by dou t. Now this time the time is just a pseudo variable there. We know the solution changes. You have seen earlier that damping, that factor omega, the relaxation factor omega. What does it do? Accelerate or decelerate convergence. Now suppose you have a delta t and solve the unsteady equation, but every cell, you start with unsteady equation, but your aim is to get only the final steady state. Let's say you don't bother about the intermediate state. Intermediate, the solution may look even, may not be physically realistic, but you are interested only in the final steady state solution. In this case, you can use something like pseudo time stepping. For each cell, you can use a different time step. Okay. We'll look at this later when you look at stability. Okay, for every cell, you can actually use it. For some cells, if you can progress faster, use a larger time step. And finally, when the solution doesn't change, dou u by dou t will be 0, which is there's no change in the properties. Okay, but you are allowing the cells which can converge faster to rush ahead, so that overall they will also accelerate convergence in the other cells. You may have a solution which is closer to the actual. This is called pseudo time stepping. We'll have a relook at it when we look at stability. Now, an adaptive grid automatically clusters grid points in regions of high flow gradients during the course of solution. So every some x number of time steps or n number of time steps, it takes a look at the solution, see where there are high gradients, and clusters more points there. Okay. It may also release the cluster at some other points where there are low gradients. Okay, that can also be done. Or it just adds more points where more detail is required. So the result is we get a better solution capturing more complexities in the flow, because you are going to cluster only in regions of high flow gradients. So you can use it in two ways. For a given number of grid points, let's say, I can use only 2 million or 3 million grid points. in my computer, or that's what my software allows, you will get a more accurate solution because you'll be clustering the grid points near or at regions of high flow gradients. Or the second way to use it is for a given accuracy. You say, I don't bother about the number of grid points. I have a massive computer, but I want so much accuracy. An accuracy of 10 power minus 6 times the initial error. To get that accuracy, you need less number of grid points. Okay. So this is the advantage of adaptive gridding. We will schematically look at how a simple example, an old example actually, but nevertheless you will get the spirit of adaptive gridding if you look at this. Delta X, you can see, is let's say small g is a flow field variable like pressure, temperature, or density, based on which you are adapting the grid. Let's say I want my grid to be sensitive to changes in pressure. In regions of high curvature, there will be the pressure change will be high. In regions of shocks, there will be high pressure changes. Okay, so if that is the way, or if you make it sensitive to velocity gradient, then near the walls there will be more velocity gradient, and near shocks also there will be more velocity gradients. So it will put more points there. So that variable, choose only one of them, density, temperature, pressure. If you're using energy equation and some heat conduction or heat flow problem, then temperature may be a primitive flow field variable. So the G can be anything. You see there are delta X and delta Y on the left hand side. They are sensitive to this dou G by dou X and dou G by dou Y. Now dou G by dou X is actually the change in this field, like dou P by dou X and dou P by dou Y, imagine. So some constant B into delta Z. Delta Z is usually 1. Delta eta is also 1. Because the indices may move like 0, 1, 2. We don't say 0.51, 1.52. It's very rarely done that way. But it is done in some ways. Okay, sometimes it's done. Now this delta Z and delta eta on the right hand side. For every increment, what is the delta X and delta Y? You can compute. If dou G by dou X is more, obviously delta X will be smaller. If dou G by dou X is less, which means less flow gradient, delta X will be larger, which means you can relax the flow there. So similarly, delta Y also. This is one of the ways in which you can look at it. So the computational plane in this schematic does not change with time, but the delta X and delta Y between the successive Z and eta change with time. So delta Z and delta eta are fixed in time. So this shows that he is not adding more number of grid points here. He is playing with the same number of grid points, but now clustering only in regions of high flow gradients. So small b, small c are constant chosen to increase or decrease the effect of gradient. Suppose you want it to be very sensitive, you give high values. If you want it to be only little sensitive, then you give low values of small v and small c in this formula. Then capital B and capital C are scale factors. You want 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. Then you have one more way of calculating, controlling it by capital B and capital C. We know delta X, delta Y are in the physical domain. Delta Z, delta eta don't change with time, they are in the computational domain. Now delta X and delta Y can change because dou G by dou X and dou G by dou Y are changing with time during a time dependent solution of flow. So the grid points actually move in space. Any doubts in this slide deck? There are no doubts. Let's go to the next slide. So let's say computational plane is fixed in time. Z and eta don't change with time. Delta Z and delta eta are also constants. So it's called dou x by dou t as we are looking at successive time steps here. You can also have the t plus delta t, you can t plus 10 delta t or something like that. Divided by 10 delta t, you can do what you want. Let's assume every step you are going to check this and rearrange the grid. Then sigma I is equal to 1 to n of delta x whole power t plus delta t minus sigma 1 to n of delta x whole power t by delta t. You see here 1, 2, 3 are given here. They are moving horizontally where delta x is increasing. Okay. So at every point, how much is delta x? Okay. At t plus delta t. The whole, let's say the expression is denotes dou x by dou t. How much you should change this delta x? What it uses? See, n is a variable here. Yeah, any doubt? Yeah. Tell me, Bhuvandev, any doubt? Bhuvandev? Okay. I have muted Bhuvandev. But, by mistake, you might have switched on. If you have a doubt, you are welcome to ask Bhuvandev. Okay. Now, what does it mean? Let me, somebody has what they have in chat. What? I am there. You are there, Bhuvandev, but there was some noise. That's why I muted you. No problem. Okay. So if you want, what it means is delta 2, for example, 1 has moved some distance. So 2 has moved some distance. So delta x will be this one. 2 should move by, let's say, it has shrunk here, only half the distance. Now 2 to 3 also, there's only, the distance is shrinking by half means. So the totally 3 will move a distance of delta x1 plus delta x2. It will move towards here. Okay, I think I'll explain better with a small picture. At the end of, let's say, the time step, let's say this is point 1, this is point 2, this is, sorry, point 3. So 1 has moved here by delta x1. So that is the distance between 0 and 1. Let's say this is 0. The distance between 0 and 1 is now reduced by delta x1. Let's say distance between 1 and 2 has reduced, changed to delta x2. Then distance between 2 and 3 has changed by delta x3, and so on and so forth. If 1 moves here, the next time step, okay, I'm here. I'm just to understand, putting side by side. If one moves here, then this is x1 minus delta x1, correct? X1, which was initially here, this is x1. Let's say this is x1. Whereas x2 will be up to this point. This is x2. Now when you come to x2, let's say 2 is here, then the distance by which 2 has moved now is actually x1 has already moved delta x1. So this distance will be delta x1 plus delta x2. When you go to 3, 3 would have moved to a closer point here, 3 prime, let's say. This is 2 prime and 1 prime. So 3 would have moved from 3 to 3 prime, which is somewhere here. So this total distance through which T has moved is delta x1 plus delta x2 plus delta x3. So much it would have moved. This is actually captured by this equation here. Okay. So this sigma delta x t plus delta t is what? The change in x at a point I, point n. That is delta x at n is actually sum of delta x from 0 to n. So now what is the delta x at t, which means that the previous times of location, what is the delta x? When you take the difference, you will have the delta x between t plus t and t divided by delta t. Hope you understand this expression. Take some time to understand. If you have doubts, you can clear with me later. Right now, if you have doubts, you can ask me. If you get the doubts later, you can call me later. Any doubts? Okay. So this is diagrammatically shown here. You see whether you can make out what I have told you. Delta x at t plus delta t, delta x at t. Okay. So now xt at xn at t, the nth point, the I is equal to n, whereas x3 will be actually delta x, is actually what? Delta x1 plus delta x2 plus delta x3. And at t plus delta t, it will be the same thing, but at t plus delta t. Okay. So if you look at this from the, it will be obvious if you understand what I told you earlier. Okay, if you have doubts, you call me again. I will explain it to you. Now you focus on the physical plane. You focus at a point in physical plane. There, x comma y is constant, but when you change this delta I, then the z and eta which you see in the physical plane will be different. They will be varying with time. Okay, for example, at the same point in xy may correspond to 1, 2. But after this clustering, the same point you may get the 4, 5 there. 4, 5 at the same xy location. So the physical plane also z and eta change with time. So you can say dou z by dou t and dou eta by dou t. So dou z by dou t is dou z by dou t. The subscript is given x, y to say that in the physical plane. Similarly, dou eta by dou t also corresponds to dou eta and dou t in the physical plane. In the computational plane, z and eta are fixed, but x and y of each point is changing with time. So dou x by dou t at z eta and dou y by dou t at z eta. It is easier to compute dou x by dou t at particular z eta than the other way around. Okay, now dou x by dou t at z eta is already known. X at t plus t at that point n minus x at t at that at that nth location divided by delta t. Similarly for y also. Similarly, dou x by dou t, dou y by dou t is computationally, they are known the computational plane. Sorry, dou x by dou t and dou y by dou t are on the computational plane. Yeah. So y prime at m also you can sum up the delta y at t. ym at t and ym at delta t plus delta, not y prime, ym at t and ym at t plus delta t. You can sum as before and get this values. Now these are the new values. Now let's look at the time derivatives of x and y. Now x is a function of z, eta and tau. Let's specify that t is equal to tau. So dou x by dou t will be, again by chain rule, dou x by dou z into dou z by dou t plus dou x by dou eta into dou eta by dou t plus dou x by dou tau into dou tau by dou t. The first two terms on the right hand side, okay, you can see when the dou by dou z is there, eta and tau are constant. The second one is the physical plane, so x and y are constant. Okay. When you dou x by dou eta itself means that dou z and tau are constant. For better understanding, he has put the subscript here. Okay. If you find some with subscript or some without subscript, he may find it confusing, so he has put it here. Then this parameter is 1, dou x by dou tau in the computational domain into dou tau by dou t is always 1 because t is equal to tau. So now if you rearrange, you will get, take this to the other side. Now in the physical plane, dou x by dou t at x at y is 0. Physical plane nothing changes, that's why this becomes 0. And because t is equal to tau, this becomes 1. Now you take it to the other side, minus dou x by dou tau, you can evaluate by this expression, equation 8, x with time in the computational domain, or how to cluster the grid in the next time step. Where should that z and eta fall in the physical plane? Okay, what is the change in that? Similarly, you can get an expression for dou y by dou tau also. I suggest you do it on your own. Look at it, do it on another paper a few times. You will understand it much better. Now, using these equations for dou z by dou t. So, okay, here, let's say dou z by dou t and dou eta by dou t are the two unknowns in this equation. Then we solve using Cramer's rule. So you will get, just like before, dou c by dou t is 1 by j into this expression. Okay. So j is the Jacobian as defined earlier. So the spatial metrics, these can be calculated. Dou x by dou z is from the earlier known xi plus 1 comma j minus xi minus 1 comma by 2 delta z is central differences. Similarly, you can calculate the dou x by dou eta and the other metrics. So these parameters, dou x by dou zeta, dou z, dou x by dou eta, dou y by dou z, dou y by dou eta are known as metrics. So I comma j you can put as n comma m in general at any particular point. So we solve for these equations and get these as before. Okay, dou z by dou t and dou eta by dou t. Now you employ this, you see this kind of evolution of flow field. Proceed from left to right. Left shows an initial time step. Then this ballistic, this bullet is flying towards this solid surface. And the bullet is piercing it. There is a lot of changes. You can see the flow field has changed, so the grid has also changed here. There's some circular thing we have started, right? But now they know that this clustering not needed here, but it's needed near the shocks. So the flow field has changed. By looking at the grid itself, you know that flow field has changed. And after it enters, you can see a lot of change in the grid and flow field. So the bottom shows the solution. You can see how the solution is evolving. The grid is evolving along with the solution. When you take this gradient and refine the grid, after some time you may get this. Okay. Again, you take this solution, then later the intermediate solution and do this, you will get this grid. Finally, the grid and the solution will look very similar. Okay. So this is an adaptive grid example. Any doubts in adaptive grids from the class? Okay. No, there are, unstructured meshes also. Yes, this. Yeah, here as an 18. Some methods like finite volume methods do not demand a unit rectangular configuration domain. Okay. So such calculations, it depending on the method you use, the solver you use, sometimes a transformation may not be needed. Okay, they are not very strict. You can use computational plane and a physical plane, but these finite volume methods especially, they don't really, the method is designed in such a way that you don't need that computational plane. You can do everything in the physical plane, but okay, the cell shape also need not be rectangular. They can be any shape, which means the I comma j, you cannot order a grid like I comma j is this point, but instead you'll have a number of vertices. So the vertices, you have to name them in one single way, x, y, z of a vertex. Vertex number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like that you have to specify the vertices. So you should know which vertex is adjoining the next cell and things like that. You have to keep track. Those are the things you have to keep track if you want to go for other shapes other than rectangular. So these can be in triangles, hexagons, tetrahedra, polyhedra. If you use methods like finite volume, we'll see what this finite volume towards the end of the course. Let's presently assume there are some methods, okay, in which you don't need this I comma j order at all. Without that itself, we can solve the flow. So you can use any of these structures. The advantage of these is when you go for complex geometries. So when there are complex geometries involved, you can satisfactorily handle without any need for a rectangular smooth grid structure or something. But these unstructured grids require a list of the connectivity, as I told you. In 2D, which vertex is adjoining which vertex? That information is called as connectivity list. So you have to maintain the list somehow within IJ form if you want regular domain, or you should know for every vertex who are the neighbors. You should know. Why should you know the neighbors? Because when you do the flux calculation, you should know how much of mass or anything that F or G, mass, momentum or energy, how much of it is coming in and how much of it is going out. So you should know from where they are coming in and where they are going out. That is why you need a connectivity list. I am looking at say one. Let me. An unstructured grid, a cell may look like this, a triangle. Sorry, assume it's a straight line. Okay. Assume all these are straight lines. Okay, they are not. Then, yeah. Let's say use triangle, and I am solving for the flux in this cell. So I should know that this cell is connected to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Not 5 really. Not this one, except this. Things can come in from any of this adjacent cell to here. And they can go out in this direction also. But since it doesn't have a surface, it cannot go to this cell. So this is called connectivity list. Somewhere the information should be there. To which cells are this cell is this cell connected? If you look at another cell, for example, this cell. Hey, where's my mouse? Mouse has disappeared. Yeah, now it's. Now for this cell, only these are neighbors. Okay. So flux can come in and go out only between these two if this is a solid wall or some boundary. Okay. So information like this will be used in your flow solvers. So this is possible if you have connectivity list, which cell is connected to which other cell. Okay. So some examples are given. For around a cylinder, it's given on the left hand side. You can see only triangles there. Then in 3D, you have tetrahedral meshes. So this is not only for CFD, even for solid structure analysis, you can use such grids. You can see this unstructured cell on the right hand side for structure inside. Okay. So we'll stop here today and probably continue tomorrow. Tomorrow is Wednesday, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we have first and third